The Canucks finally part ways with Bruce Boudreau. The Bills have another disappointing end to the season, while the Leafs might be ready to do some shopping. Hey everyone, welcome into another Sun Sports Roundtable. Rob Wong joined alongside by Michael Traikos and Steve Simmons. And guys, it was the worst kept secret in the NHL. The Vancouver Canucks were finally set to fire Bruce Boudreau, and they did it on Sunday, bringing in Rick Tocchet as his replacement. I think it would be hard to find someone that is in the Canucks corner for how they've handled this whole situation. But Steve, who deserves the most blame for this? Is it team president Jim Rutherford and his loose lips in the media, or is it chairman and owner Francesco Aquilini and his fingerprints?
Well, I think you always go to the top first, which is where the owner is. And the owner is somewhat of a disaster and has been somewhat of a disaster for many, many years. So he brings in Jim Rutherford, who is the general manager of Hall of Fame caliber and much repute, a Stanley Cup winner. And since he's been there, it's been total dysfunction. So I don't know if Jim's totally into the whole thing or whether it's impossible to work under those circumstances. But somewhere between Jim Rutherford and Francesco Aquilini, we have someone or a combination of two people who have messed this thing up in a most embarrassing way. And one of the most embarrassing circumstances I think we've seen, Mike, in a very long time.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Steve. It's probably not just one person to blame, but at the same time, you're the Canucks, you bring in Jim Rutherford to provide some stability and some respect around a franchise that has been beleaguered in years. And Rutherford has done neither. You can look at what he's able to acquire on the ice, and it's obviously not a winning product, but off the ice, this was supposed to be the kind of things that he avoids. And I go back to Brian Burke and how he fired Ron Wilson back in the day. And he said it would be cruel and unusual punishment to put out Ron Wilson in a scenario where he was constantly getting booed on home ice. And I look at Bruce Boudreau, and why wasn't he saved of the same sort of cruel and unusual punishment? There really isn't an answer for it. You had an assistant coach in Mike Yeo that could have stepped in. Instead, you waited and waited and waited. And like you said, Rob, worst kept secret. And here we are at the final destination, and it came way too late and too good of a guy to have to be dragged through the mud like this in Boudreau.
Well, here's what makes no sense. You have a great guy in Bruce Boudreau. Everybody loves him. Players love him. The team loves him. He's a guy throughout hockey. I can't tell you how many text messages I've got from coaches in the NHL in the last 3 days who are shocked by what's gone on in Vancouver. And then you have a guy like Jim Rutherford, who's very popular, who's very well liked. So how is it that these two guys, both popular, both thought of highly around the game, and in the case of Rutherford, how did he make such a mess of what should have been a rather cut and dried situation? It was clear from day one this season that Bruce Boudreau was not his coach. He probably should have made the move before the season began.
Well, good luck to Rick Tocchet in that new situation out west in Vancouver. For all of the loud hype coming into the season for the Buffalo Bills, guys, their season ends rather quietly with a 27-10 no-show at home against the Bengals in the divisional round. In order to take that next step, Michael, do they just run it back with some tweaks, or do the Bills need to make some wholesale changes?
It's funny, in the NFL, it seems like whenever you don't win a Super Bowl, you don't fire the head coach necessarily. You take out all of his assistants. And I don't know what this new trend is, how it started, but it goes to hockey now, and even baseball is kind of following the same thing. And yeah, you look at that game against the Bengals, and I don't know if I blame the head coach or the offensive coordinator, but something was missing obviously there. It kind of reminded me of the Toronto Maple Leafs, where you're trying to rely on Austin Matthews to score a hat trick in a playoff game, and that's what they were doing with the Bills there. They're relying on their quarterback to perform his usual heroics, and on the other end of the scrimmage line, you had Burrow just, systematically just taking apart the Bills' defense. So, you've got a great quarterback in Josh Allen. I just think that you can't just rely on him throwing Hail Mary or 50-50 passes up and down the field game after game if you're going to win a Super Bowl. And they need some sort of different approach there, because you do have a great quarterback, but you just got to work with the pieces that you've got around him.
The Bills need to do a deep dive as an organization as to what happened yesterday. And never mind the 13 seconds in Kansas City a year ago. They were systematically taken apart yesterday. The offensive line of the Bengals destroyed the defensive line of the Bills. the defensive line of the Bengals destroyed the offensive line of the Bills. So if you're getting beaten up, this isn't just a quarterback yesterday. This was every single aspect of football. Go back to Vince Lombardi and blocking and tackling. The Bengals were dominant in every possible way. Now, if you're the Buffalo Bills and you thought you had a Super Bowl team, you thought you had a team that can get there, you have to look at every aspect from coaching, head coaching, coordinators, other coaches, all your players. What are you going to do? Because you have this Superman quarterback, Mike, but what they don't have is enough of a team around him to win at this level. And you saw how good the Bengals were and how great some of Philadelphia was. You're seeing Kansas City. You're seeing these teams. They're better teams right now, and the Bills were predicted by many to be Super Bowl champions this year.
Finally, the rumor mill is heating up again with regards to the Maple Leafs and some of the names that they might be targeting at the trade deadline, whether it's a Ryan O'Reilly, Bo Horvat, or Jake McCabe or Vladislav Gavrikov on the back end. But my question is, Steve, should the Maple Leafs be going all in and moving their top prospects, top draft picks in order to shop in the star tier, or do they go bargain hunting, looking to get a good deal?
Well, I think you look at this. I think this is a year you can win it's a winnable Stanley Cup this year. Who's out there that's great right now? The Boston Bruins have been great all season. They can't possibly be this great over 82 games and into the playoffs. It's never been done before. It's not going to happen this year. So who's out there right now that will be better in the East than the Leafs if they add the right pieces in the right places? And what's happened the last few years? They haven't been able to score when it mattered most, in game sixes, in game sevens, in clinching games, whether it was Columbus or Boston or Montreal or whomever they were playing against, Tampa. They can't, with all this offensive talent, they haven't been able to score. They need to add another forward. I think that's the number one priority, preferably a top six guy that can score and add to the offense and can look to create offense when the big guys, the big names, the core four, aren't doing it.
Yeah, you know what? They need to add someone, Rob and Steve, because Boston is going to add someone. Tampa Bay is going to add someone. Carolina is going to add someone. Go down the list, and it's not so much who the Leafs get; it's who around them goes where. So, I don't think that. I think this trade deadline is plentiful enough where you don't have to necessarily go out and get a Pat Kane or a Bo Horvat or one of those top dogs. I think you can go bargain hunting, and we saw that Kyle Dubas was already in Montreal sniffing around. Sean Monahan is an option, possibly Joel Edmondson on the back end. I think it's really paramount that the Leafs get someone, but don't trade Matthew Nyes, who, there's not a whole lot of prospects now. You look at what Nick Robertson is out again for the rest of the season with an injury. He's not looking like he might pan out into a top six guy. So it might just be Matthew Nyes, especially with how many first round picks Kyle Dubas has given up in the last year. I think it's something like 3 of the last 4 drafts he's traded a first round pick. So, this might be the year where you can get by, give up a second or a third round pick and still end up with those pieces that Steve's talking about.
The challenge becomes there's so much competition. I counted, I think, the other day, it's going to be 20 buyers and maybe 12 sellers. So how much competition is there going to be for every one of those good players to great players who happen to be available? And even the middle guys you're talking about, Mike, competition. So the assumption always is Leaf fans will say, Dubas should get this guy, and this guy. Well, there's 12 or 13 other GMs on the phone making the same calls to the same people, trying to get the same players. That's the challenge here, and that's where being great at your job really comes into play.
Yeah, going to be tough for Kyle Dubas to maybe pull off one of these big moves, but we've seen him be creative in the past. Let us know your thoughts on all of these topics in the comments. For Steve Simmons and Michael Traikos, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week on yet another Sun Sports Roundtable.